Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Imagine your HOA hires a violation team, and their first stop is behind your house, taking photos through your windows. You tell them they're trespassing. Then they claim the tree line means they can do whatever they want. I had proof they were wrong. But would it be enough to stop them? Let me back up and explain how this all started. I live in what you'd call a semi-rural subdivision about 40 minutes outside the city. When my wife and I bought this place 8 years ago, it was perfect for us. We've got just over 3 acres, most of it backing up to a common area that's basically a small forest. The HOA had always been pretty hands-off, which was exactly what we wanted. They'd send out their annual dues notice, organize the occasional community yard sale, and that was about it. I work as a land surveyor, which becomes important later in this story. My job involves a lot of technical precision, knowing property boundaries down to the inch, and understanding the legal side of land ownership. It also means I'm pretty particular about things being done the right way, especially when it comes to property rights. The trouble started about 6 months ago when a new board president got elected. I'll call her the president since I don't want to use names, but you can probably imagine the type. She moved to our neighborhood about 2 years ago and immediately started complaining about everything. The mailboxes weren't uniform enough, some people's landscaping was inconsistent with community standards. A few folks had sheds that were too visible from the street. During the board election, she ran on this platform of bringing our community into the 21st century and maximizing property values through aesthetic compliance. She threw around phrases like community synergy, and talked about how we needed comprehensive oversight to maintain our investment integrity. Half the neighborhood didn't even vote, and the other half split between her and the old president who just wanted to keep things the way they were. She won by 12 votes. Within a month of taking office, she'd hired some outside consulting firm to conduct what she called a comprehensive compliance assessment. The way she explained it at the board meeting, this team would walk through the neighborhood and identify any violations of the HOA bylaws so we could address inconsistencies before they impact our collective property values. Most people seem to think it was reasonable enough. Our bylaws are pretty standard stuff. No boats or RVs parked in driveways, grass can't be more than 4 inches tall, no fences over 6 feet, sheds have to be earth tones and can't be visible from the street. Basic suburban stuff that most of us were already following anyway. But I had a bad feeling about it. Maybe it was my professional experience dealing with overzealous code enforcement officers, or maybe it was just the way the new president got this look in her eyes when she talked about violations. Either way, I decided to be proactive. The month before the violation team was scheduled to start their sweep, I had my property officially resurveyed and restaked. In my line of work, I know how often people get confused about where their property lines actually are, especially in neighborhoods like ours where the lots are irregular and there's natural boundaries like tree lines. I wanted to make absolutely sure I knew exactly where my property ended and the common area began. The surveyor I hired is someone I've worked with for years, and he does excellent work. We spent a whole day walking the perimeter, and he set fresh iron pins at every corner with bright neon pink flagging tape. The pins are the permanent markers, but the tape makes them visible from a distance. According to the survey, my property line runs about 15 feet into what most people think of as the tree line at the back of my lot. I also upgraded my security camera system around the same time. I'd had a basic setup for a few years, just a couple cameras watching the driveway and front door, but I decided to invest in a proper network video recorder system with cameras covering the entire perimeter of my property. High definition, night vision, motion detection, the works. The cameras also record audio, which ended up being crucial. My wife thought I was being paranoid, and maybe I was, but in my experience, when someone starts talking about comprehensive oversight, it's usually a good idea to have your documentation in order. The violation team started their neighborhood sweep on a Tuesday morning in early September. I was working from home that day, which was lucky because otherwise I might have missed the whole thing. I was sitting at my desk in the home office, which has a window overlooking the backyard, when I noticed movement near the tree line. 3 people in bright yellow high-visibility vests were walking across my back lawn like they owned the place. At first I thought they might be utility workers, but something seemed off. They weren't following any of the underground utility lines, and they were carrying clipboards and what looked like professional cameras instead of utility equipment. I pulled up the camera system on my computer to get a better look. The back cameras showed them clearly now. 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all carrying measuring wheels, clipboards, and expensive-looking digital cameras. The woman seemed to be in charge, pointing at different parts of my property while the men took notes and photos. They were taking pictures of everything: my detached garage, the small storage shed near the fence, even the hedges along the side of the house. But what really caught my attention was when one of the men walked up to the windows of the garage and started peering inside, taking photos through the glass. That's when I realized these had to be the HOA violation team, and they were definitely on my private property, not in the common area. Instead of running outside immediately, I decided to watch and record everything. The camera system was capturing all of this automatically, but I wanted to make sure I had backup recordings. I started screen recording the live camera feed on my computer while keeping an eye on what they were doing. The team leader, a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair, was clearly running the show. She'd point at something, one of the men would take measurements, and then they'd mark notes on their clipboards. I watched them spend about 10 minutes examining my shed, which is painted forest green and sits about 30 feet from the back property line. They measured the height, the distance from the house, even the color against some kind of chart they had. Then they moved on to my hedges. I've got a row of privet hedges along the east side of my property that I planted about 5 years ago. They're beautiful hedges, well maintained, and they provide great privacy from the neighbor's house. But they're probably about 7 feet tall, which might technically violate the 6 feet maximum fence rule if you consider hedges to be fences. I watched one of the men pull out a tape measure and confirm that yes, the hedges were over 6 feet. The team leader made a big show of marking something on her clipboard and then actually tied orange flagging tape to several of the hedge plants. That's when I decided I'd seen enough. I grabbed my coffee mug, slipped my phone into my pocket, and walked outside like I was just casually checking on things in my backyard. The team didn't notice me at first. They were too busy marking what they apparently considered violations on my property. When I got within about 20 feet of them, the team leader finally looked up. She didn't apologize or explain what they were doing. Instead, she just nodded at me like I was interrupting her work and said they were with the Architectural Review Committee. She told me I was being cited for an unapproved structure and non-compliant landscaping and suggested I stay back so they could finish their assessment. I took a sip of my coffee and asked to see their identification and a copy of the right of entry clause from the HOA bylaws that authorized them to be on my private property. The man with the measuring wheel, who I later learned was the actual team leader despite the woman doing most of the talking, looked annoyed by the question. He had this smug expression like I was wasting his time with technicalities. He told me it was all in my contract and that they were authorized to be there. I asked him specifically which section of the bylaws gave them the right to enter private property without notice. He waved his hand dismissively and said they could be anywhere they needed to be to conduct their assessment. That's when I pulled out my phone and opened up the HOA bylaws document. I downloaded it the night before and highlighted the relevant sections. I read him the exact language from section 12.3, which states that the HOA has right of entry for easements and common areas, but that access to private fenced or improved acreage requires 48-hour written notice to the homeowner except in cases of emergency. The woman with the clipboard argued that they weren't on private property, that they were still in the common area near the tree line. She pointed toward the woods and insisted that was the natural boundary between my lot and the common area. This is where my professional background came in handy. I calmly informed them that they were currently standing approximately 50 feet past the common area boundary. I pointed out the bright pink flagging tape marking the iron survey pins that they'd literally walked past to get where they were. The man with the measuring wheel looked at the flags like he was seeing them for the first time, which he probably was. He argued that natural boundaries like tree lines supersede survey markers, which is completely wrong and shows he had no idea what he was talking about. I explained that the property had been officially resurveyed and restaked just last month, and that the survey was filed with the county. The iron pins were the legal boundaries, period. Everything between the pins and the house was private property, and they were trespassing. The team leader got more aggressive at this point. He told me the HOA board had authorized a full perimeter sweep of the neighborhood, and that they had every right to be there. He said if I had a problem with it, I could take it up with the board at the next meeting. Then the woman started tying more orange tape to my hedges, like she was marking them for removal or something. She told me the hedges were clearly in violation and would need to be trimmed to regulation height within 30 days. That's when I realized this wasn't just a mistake or misunderstanding. These people knew they were on my private property and didn't care. They were either completely ignorant of property law or they were deliberately ignoring it because they thought they could get away with it. I decided to try a different approach. Instead of continuing to argue with them, I called the HOA management office right there on the spot on speakerphone so everyone could hear. The secretary answered on the second ring, and I identified myself and asked her to confirm whether the HOA had sent a team to conduct an assessment at my address. She was very cheerful and helpful. She told me yes, they were conducting a zero-tolerance sweep of the entire neighborhood that day. She seemed proud of how thorough they were being and mentioned that they'd already identified dozens of violations just that morning. I thanked her for the confirmation and hung up. The violation team was still standing there, looking less confident than they had a few minutes earlier. That's when I dropped the hammer. I pulled out a form I'd prepared ahead of time and handed it to the team leader. It was an official notice of trespass form, completely filled out except for the date and time. I informed them that every photograph they'd taken on my private property constituted illegal surveillance and that their presence on my property after being asked to leave constituted criminal trespassing. I gave them 60 seconds to collect their equipment and exit my property or I would call the police. The woman with the clipboard tried to argue that they were just doing their job and that the HOA had authorized their presence. I told her that the HOA doesn't own my property and has no authority to authorize trespassing. The team leader started gathering their equipment, but he was clearly angry about it. He told me I was being unreasonable and that this kind of attitude was exactly what was wrong with the neighborhood. He said people like me were the reason property values couldn't improve. I watched them pack up their measuring wheels and cameras, making sure they took all their orange flagging tape with them. As they walked back toward the common area, I called out to remind them that they were being recorded by multiple security cameras and that all of their footage would be preserved as evidence. Once they were gone, I went back inside and immediately started preserving the evidence. I exported video files from all the cameras showing their entire visit, from the moment they stepped onto my property until they left. I also made backup copies of the recording of my phone call to the HOA office, but I wasn't done yet. The fact that they'd been taking photos through the windows of my garage really bothered me. That felt like a serious privacy violation, not just trespassing. And the way they'd acted so entitled about being on my property made me think this wasn't their first time doing this kind of thing. I called the non-emergency police number and explained the situation. I told them I had trespassers on my property who had been taking photographs without permission and had refused to leave when asked. I mentioned that I had the entire incident recorded on security cameras. The dispatcher said they'd send someone out, and about 20 minutes later a patrol officer arrived. He was professional and thorough, which I appreciated. I showed him the survey pins marking my property line, played the relevant portions of the security camera footage, and explained the legal issues with what the violation team had done. The officer was particularly interested in the photos they'd taken through the garage windows. He said that could potentially be considered voyeurism or invasion of privacy depending on what was visible inside. He took down all the information and said he'd follow up with the HOA management company to get contact information for the violation team. But it turned out I didn't need to track them down. They came back on their own. About an hour after the police officer left, I got a phone call from someone identifying himself as the owner of the consulting firm the HOA had hired. He said there had been a misunderstanding about property boundaries and that his team would be returning to apologize and delete any photographs taken on private property. I told him that would be fine, but that any further contact should go through my attorney. I gave him my lawyer's name and number and said all future communications should be directed there. He seemed surprised that I was involving an attorney and tried to assure me that it was all just a simple mistake. I told him that taking photographs through the windows of my garage wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate invasion of privacy, and that refusing to leave when informed they were trespassing wasn't a mistake either. The violation team came back about 2 hours later, this time with a very different attitude. The team leader was polite and apologetic, and immediately offered to delete all the photos they'd taken. I told them I appreciated the gesture, but that the damage was already done and they'd need to deal with my attorney going forward. I also mentioned that I'd be presenting the evidence of their trespassing and privacy violations at the next HOA board meeting, which was scheduled for the following week. The woman with the clipboard looked genuinely scared when I said that. They deleted the photos in front of me, showing me each image on their cameras before deleting it. But of course, I had no way to know if they'd already uploaded copies somewhere or if they had backup storage devices. That's why everything was going through my attorney from that point forward. Over the next few days, I did some research into the consulting firm and the new HOA president. What I found was very interesting. The consulting firm specialized in what they called revenue optimization for homeowners associations. Their business model was essentially to find as many violations as possible and help HOAs collect fines to fund capital improvement projects. Their website bragged about helping communities raise hundreds of thousands of dollars through comprehensive compliance enforcement. Even more interesting was what I learned about the HOA president. It turned out she had a history of this kind of thing. In her previous neighborhood, she'd been part of a board that got sued for harassment and selective enforcement of HOA rules. The case was settled out of court, but according to public records, the HOA had to pay significant damages to 3 different homeowners. I also learned something that really got my attention. According to the minutes from the board meeting where they approved hiring the consulting firm, the president had specifically suggested they begin the assessment with non-compliant properties that have been resistant to previous board initiatives. When I read that, I remembered that I'd voted against her in the board election. I'd also spoken up at a few board meetings over the years when I thought they were being overly restrictive. Apparently, that had put me on her list of problem homeowners. This wasn't random enforcement or a simple mistake. This was targeted harassment, and I had evidence to prove it. I spent the weekend preparing for the board meeting. My attorney helped me put together a presentation that laid out the entire incident step by step. We had the security camera footage, the recording of the phone call to the HOA office confirming they'd sent the team, photos of the survey pins they'd ignored, and documentation of the consulting firm's business model. We also had something else. My attorney had done some research into the HOA's insurance policy and discovered that their general liability coverage specifically excluded claims arising from intentional trespassing or privacy violations by board members or authorized agents. That meant if I decided to sue for invasion of privacy and harassment, the HOA's insurance wouldn't cover their legal costs. The board members would be personally liable for any damages. The board meeting was held in the community center the following Tuesday evening. Word had gotten around about what happened, and the room was packed. A lot of neighbors had apparently received violation notices from the consulting firm over the past week, and people were not happy about it. I wasn't the only one who'd had problems with the violation team. 3 other homeowners had similar stories about the team trespassing on private property, taking photos without permission, and being generally aggressive and dismissive when challenged. One neighbor, an elderly man who lives at the end of my street, said the team had actually entered his backyard through an unlocked gate and taken photos of his pool area without knocking on his door or asking permission. His wife had discovered them when she looked out the kitchen window and saw strangers in their yard. Another neighbor, a woman who works night shifts and sleeps during the day, said the team had been on her property taking measurements and photos while she was sleeping. She only found out about it when her next-door neighbor called to ask if she knew there were people with cameras walking around her house. When it was my turn to speak, I played the relevant portions of the security camera footage on a laptop connected to the projector. The room was completely silent as everyone watched the violation team walk across my lawn, take photos through my garage windows, and refused to leave when I told them they were trespassing. Then I played the recording of the phone call to the HOA office where the secretary confirmed that the team had been sent to conduct a zero-tolerance sweep of the neighborhood. When the footage ended, I explained that what they'd just witnessed wasn't random enforcement or a simple mistake. I read the quote from the board meeting minutes about targeting non-compliant properties that have been resistant to previous board initiatives. I told the board that I had documented evidence that this was targeted harassment based on my voting record and previous participation in board meetings. I said that the consulting firm's business model was to generate revenue through aggressive violation enforcement, not to improve the community. Then my attorney stood up and explained the legal implications. He said that authorizing agents to trespass on private property and take photographs without permission constituted invasion of privacy and harassment. He explained that the HOA's insurance policy wouldn't cover claims arising from intentional misconduct, which meant the board members could be personally liable for damages. He also mentioned that we'd identified at least 4 homeowners who had similar experiences with unauthorized entry and photography, which could potentially support a class action lawsuit for systematic harassment. The room erupted after that. People started demanding answers from the board about who had authorized the violation team to enter private property and why homeowners hadn't been notified about the change in enforcement procedures. The HOA president tried to defend herself, saying that the consulting firm had assured the board they were operating within their legal authority. She insisted that the violations were real and that enforcement was necessary to protect property values. But the other board members were clearly uncomfortable with what they were hearing. The vice president, who had been on the board for several years, said he hadn't understood that the consulting firm would be entering private property without notice. He said he thought they would only be observing from public areas like streets and sidewalks. The treasurer pointed out that the consulting firm's contract with the HOA was costing the community several $1,000s, plus a percentage of any fines collected. She said that if the community faced lawsuits because of the firm's methods, the legal costs could bankrupt the HOA. The meeting went on for almost 3 hours, but the outcome was pretty clear early on. The board voted unanimously to terminate their contract with the consulting firm effective immediately. They also voted to dismiss all violations that had been issued during the firm's assessment, pending a review of their enforcement procedures. But that wasn't enough for most of the homeowners in the room. Several people called for the president to resign, arguing that she had deliberately misled the board about the consulting firm's methods and had targeted specific homeowners for harassment. The president refused to resign and tried to maintain that she'd acted in good faith. But when the board secretary read aloud from the consulting firm's contract, which specifically mentioned their aggressive enforcement strategies and revenue maximization techniques, it became clear that she'd known exactly what she was authorizing. The final straw was when another board member revealed that the president had specifically requested that my property be assessed first, despite the fact that I'd never received any previous violation notices and my property was clearly well maintained. That's when the board voted to hold an emergency executive session to discuss the president's conduct. The public portion of the meeting ended with the announcement that there would be a special election within 60 days to potentially replace board members. I didn't stick around for the executive session, but I heard from other neighbors that it got pretty heated. Apparently, the other board members were furious when they learned about the targeted enforcement and the potential legal liability they were facing. 3 days later, I received a letter from the HOA's attorney offering a settlement agreement. They agreed to reimburse me for my legal costs, formally apologize for the trespassing incident, and guarantee that no future violations would be issued for my hedges or any other features of my property that had been in place prior to the consulting firm's assessment. They also agreed to implement new policies requiring 48-hour written notice before any HOA representatives or contractors entered private property, and to provide homeowners with a clear appeals process for any violations. In exchange, they wanted me to agree not to pursue legal action for the privacy violations and harassment. My attorney advised me to accept the settlement. He said that while we probably could have gotten more money by going to court, the settlement addressed the main issues and would prevent similar problems in the future. Plus, the HOA had already agreed to change their enforcement policies, which was really what I'd wanted all along. I signed the settlement agreement, and 2 weeks later I received a check for my legal costs plus a little extra for my trouble. But the real satisfaction came from what happened at the special election. The president was voted out by a margin of more than 3-1. The new board president was a retired engineer who'd lived in the neighborhood for over 15 years. His platform was basically, leave people alone unless they're actually harming property values or violating safety rules. One of the first things the new board did was revise the HOA bylaws to clarify the enforcement procedures and limit the board's authority to enter private property. They also established a 3-strike system for violations so homeowners would get warnings before facing fines for minor issues. But I wasn't quite done yet. You see, I'd been planning a project for the back of my property for several years, and the settlement check gave me the perfect excuse to move forward with it. I used the money to build a new fence along the back property line. A beautiful 6-foot cedar privacy fence that runs right along the survey markers, perfectly compliant with the HOA rules but positioned to block the former president's view of the sunset from her back porch. The fence is completely legal and was properly permitted with the county. It doesn't violate any HOA rules because it's exactly 6 feet tall and made of approved materials. But it effectively ends the open sight line that the former president used to enjoy across the common area to the hills beyond. I also used some of the settlement money to upgrade my security camera system again. The new cameras have even better night vision and audio recording capabilities. I figured if anyone else wanted to try measuring my grass or taking photos of my property without permission, I'd be ready for them. The consulting firm, by the way, went out of business about 6 months later. Word got around to other HOAs about their aggressive tactics and the legal problems they'd caused. Apparently, we weren't the only community that had issues with their revenue optimization approach. The former president moved away about a year later. I heard she was having trouble selling her house because potential buyers were put off by the privacy fence blocking the view she'd advertised. She ended up taking a significant loss on the sale, which I can't say I felt bad about. The neighborhood has been peaceful ever since. The new board focuses on actual maintenance issues like road repair and landscaping the common areas. They still enforce the rules, but they do it reasonably and with proper notice. Most importantly, they respect property boundaries and privacy rights. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm glad I stood up for myself when I did. If I'd just accepted the violation notices and paid the fines, it would have encouraged even more aggressive enforcement. Other homeowners might not have known their rights or had the resources to fight back. The key lessons I learned are pretty simple. First, know your property boundaries and your rights as a homeowner. Second, document everything with photos and recordings when possible. Third, don't let people intimidate you just because they claim to have authority. And finally, if someone wants to play games with rules and regulations, make sure you know the rules better than they do. They wanted to measure my grass and photograph my property without permission. Instead, they ended up measuring how much trouble they could get into for trespassing and taking pictures where they shouldn't have been. Sometimes the best revenge is just making sure people follow the same rules they want to force on everyone else. I still live in the same house, and my hedges are still 7 feet tall. The difference is that now everyone knows exactly where the property lines are and everyone understands that private property means private property. The violation team never did come back to finish their neighborhood sweep. Funny how that works out. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I worked in an accounting department at a small business. My boss Gary was great and gave us lots of autonomy to get everything done. It was a small business, and over the years, as is common in small businesses, I picked up a number of duties that weren't strictly in my job description but were pretty important. We also had a number of processes that were not well documented, but we were understaffed and not able to make any real changes. Things overall were pretty good though, and our work flowed well and everyone was happy. Not everyone though. Gary's boss Carl recently had taken over as president of the company and wanted to slash costs. Gary was one of the highest paid employees and Carl tried to get him to take a pay cut or a cut in hours. When Gary refused, Carl fired him and shortly replaced him with Matt, who was much less experienced and much less qualified. Around this time, I used my leverage with Carl to get a solid raise. I knew Carl would be looking to replace me soon like he did Gary, but I was too essential to lose without Gary there either. I figured I had about 6 months, which lined up with about when I was planning to move out of state anyway. So, knowing that when I did leave, my coworkers would be stuck picking up the slack of my job, particularly all the ancillary stuff I had picked up that was not documented at all, I started writing a detailed manual for my own job when I had time here and there. I didn't really care for Matt or Carl, but I figured it would save my coworkers a lot of stress. Matt was a poor accountant and a worse manager. He was an awful micromanager with no concept of the bigger picture. Pretty quickly, he noticed that I was spending time doing all these other duties not in my JD. He told me I was only to work on projects he assigned me directly. I tried to point out all the things that would not get done if I didn't do that. He was having none of it and told me not to worry about it, as it wasn't my job. Sure thing, boss. I stopped doing anything except what he told me to do, and the department started falling apart. Customer emails went unanswered, software stopped working with no one to support it, files weren't organized, etc. I normally took care of these and 100 other things, but Matt was pretty clear I'm not to do any of it. I also stopped working on my manual. After a few months of this, but sooner than I expected, I was laid off by Carl and Matt for budgetary reasons. Of course, they listed my job on Indeed that same day, for a laughably low salary. I was given no warning, just sat down for a meeting with the two and walked out the door. Matt didn't allow me to take anything from my desk, access my computer, or say my goodbyes to my coworkers. He was also very clear I was not to retain any company documents or information. Sure thing, boss. So I left, and I heard from coworkers still there that over the next few weeks things took an even worse nosedive. They weren't able to fill my job, and nobody could cover most of my actual job duties or any of my ancillary duties. By this point, vendors weren't being paid and payroll wasn't going out on time, and then I got the call. Matt found the file I had left in a conspicuous spot on the network drive. Job manual and processes.zip. It was encrypted. What's in it? Oh, just a draft of all my job duties and everything I was responsible for that I worked on during downtime. Why was it even encrypted? Well, it had a bunch of confidential data and passwords in it, boss. What's the password? Sorry, boss, I don't know. I didn't retain it after leaving. But it's in my files. In reality, since it wasn't finished, the manual wasn't going to be some panacea for all the company's problems, but I had padded it with a lot of images, so I imagine the file size was pretty attractive, and the password was indeed in my files. If Matt cared to look, he'd find an unlabeled sticky note with a nondescript string of letters and numbers in a random folder in one of my 24 filing cabinets. As an epilogue, about 3 months after I talked to Matt, Carl fired him after discovering what a disaster the department had become. My co-workers both left around the same time for better opportunities. Carl's still been unable to fill any of these jobs after almost 18 months, so the entire accounting department is staffed by contractors and consultants, who I am sure are costing the company a fortune. I hear the board is looking for a change in company presidents. The next one is an entitled People Story. I was hired by a company as an assistant manager, a job for which I was well qualified. The owner was rarely on site as he owned several businesses. The company was run by a GM who hired me but worked mostly on the second shift, so I would have little daily contact with her since I was hired for the first shift. I was assigned to Eva for training. Eva was a manager and had been with the company for 5 years. I trained with her for a few days, and then I was on my own, though she and I had overlapping shifts and would see each other a few days a week. We were friendly but not close. After a few months, I was doing well at my job and had even gotten some new procedures adopted to help boost sales. Eva began to act resentful. She would correct me for small things and took any opportunity to remind me that she had trained me. It didn't matter to me. She wasn't my boss. I reported to the GM. So I mostly just ignored her. What I didn't know was that Eva was not just tight with the GM. They had worked together at another place for 10 years before this one. One day at shift end, the GM asked to talk to me. She told me it wasn't working out, said I was still making mistakes at 6 months that I shouldn't be. I asked for examples. A few of them were petty matters Eva had mentioned, but most of them were just not true. I tried to argue, but it was clear that I was set up. I decided to reach out to the owner since I had nothing to lose. He was sympathetic, but said he relied on the GM to run the business and had to support her decision. Then he mentioned that if things hadn't been so bad between me and Eva, it probably could have been worked out. That's when I knew she was behind my being fired from a job I needed, really liked, and was making great money, and I vowed to get revenge. I started searching for her online information. In less than an hour, I had uncovered gold thanks to one of those pay services. About 3 months prior, Eva was arrested and charged with DWI in a neighboring state. The court records showed she had a hearing coming up in a few weeks. That was enough to get her fired. It affects a professional license she and I had to have as management. Per state law, license holders must report criminal charges to the licensing board, and in the case of a DWI arrest, licenses are typically suspended pending trial. I called the owner and told him what I discovered. It was news to him. I guess since it was out of state, Eva was keeping it secret. Maybe she was hoping to get let off the charges. The next day, the owner called and said Eva was fired. He thanked me for telling him about her DWI, apologized for how I was fired, and offered me Eva's position and salary. He asked me to come in the next morning to meet with him and to cover Eva's shift. I accepted. That alone was sweetly satisfying revenge, but what happened next was the icing on the cake. I got to work extra early, met with the owner and GM, and we all agreed to start fresh. Cool. It was still an hour before opening, and I was in the back of the place when I heard the front door chime. When I came out a few minutes later, Eva was there, tears flowing, begging the owner for her job back. She obviously didn't know I was there because when she saw me, her whole body seized, and her shocked expression was priceless. I walked right by her, staring her down with a crafty grin, and went outside. Eva came out a minute later and wouldn't make eye contact. As she walked away, I said, "Good luck on the 23rd. That was her court date. Over the next few months, I flourished in my new role. I introduced several new strategies that improved sales and cut costs, and the owner was very pleased. I received a generous bonus for my efforts. One day, a few months later, I received a call from Eva. She was sobbing uncontrollably, begging me for forgiveness. I could hear the desperation in her voice. I was enjoying this, and so I told her that I had moved on, but that she should never underestimate someone's ability to get revenge. I hung up and went back to work, feeling satisfied that justice had been served. I knew that I had won, and that Eva would never be able to get the best of me again. The next one is an entitled people story. My name is Lily, and I recently moved to a new neighborhood with my husband and our 2 children. The neighborhood was managed by a local HOA, but we were fortunate enough to have a house that fell outside the range of their control. We were excited to have more freedom than our neighbors, but little did we know that this would attract the attention of Karen, the self-appointed neighborhood police. Our first encounter with Karen was when we were unloading our moving truck. She came over to us, accusing us of being intruders and questioning who we were and what we were doing. Despite our attempts to explain our situation, she refused to listen and left us feeling uneasy and unwelcome. Over the next few weeks, Karen continued to make our lives difficult. She would leave HOA materials at our doorstep, issue us fines for minor grievances, and even called the police on us when our children were playing in our own backyard pool. It seemed like she was constantly watching us and waiting for us to slip up. One day, my husband and I decided to go to the local city hall to get more information about the HOA and why our house was exempt. We discovered that our house was built before the HOA was established, and therefore was not subject to their rules and regulations. Armed with this knowledge, we felt more empowered to stand up to Karen's harassment, but things only got worse. Karen started to spread rumors about us to our neighbors, telling them that we were troublemakers and didn't belong in the neighborhood. We tried to ignore her, but it was hard when we knew that she was turning our neighbors against us. Then one night, we were woken up by a loud banging on our front door. It was Karen, demanding that we let her in. We refused, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. She started to yell and threaten us, and we knew that we had to call the police. When the police arrived, Karen was still outside of our house, screaming and causing a scene. They arrested her for disorderly conduct, but we knew that this wouldn't be the end of it. A few days later, we received a letter in the mail from Karen's lawyer, threatening to sue us for harassment and emotional distress. We were shocked and scared, but we knew that we had done nothing wrong. We hired a lawyer ourselves, and after a long and stressful legal battle, the case was dismissed. But Karen wasn't done yet. One night, while we were sleeping, someone broke into our house and stole some of our belongings. We were devastated and scared. We suspected that it was Karen, but we couldn't prove it. The police investigation turned up no leads, and we were left feeling vulnerable and unsafe in our own home. We decided that we needed to move for the safety and well-being of our family. Thankfully, we were able to find a new home in a different neighborhood. We've been here for a few months now, and we feel much happier and more at peace. We've learned a lot from our experience with Karen, and we're grateful that we were able to stand up for ourselves and come out stronger on the other side. And as for Karen, we've heard through the grapevine that she was eventually forced to move out of the neighborhood after too many complaints from her neighbors. We can only hope that she's learned something from this experience and that she'll never treat anyone else the way she treated us. The next one is a petty revenge story. So, my dear old mother has been my personal hell for as long as I can remember. It started with her threatening to hit me with a bottle, then trying to break down my door while screaming obscenities at me. She even hit me over the head with an umbrella and yelled at me when I cried. I was 11 at the time. She blamed me for my sister's divorce, which happened when I was 6. For years, left for 3 months without warning, and then acted entitled to my forgiveness when she came back. She's thrown things at me, broken 3 TVs, and called me a myriad of names, ranging from mild things like useless waste of space to actual curses. The worst thing is that she acts like she's the best mom in existence around other people. She compliments me and stuff, and I can't have a support system because no one would believe me if I told them how awful she is. But I've had an ace up my sleeve for 2 years now. I've secretly recorded videos and audios of every horrible moment and kept them in a safe folder. I have recordings of the moments mentioned above and lots more of her talking crap about neighbors, friends, and even her own eldest child behind their back. Tonight I'm packing for uni. By morning, the entire folder will reach multiple people, including my half-siblings, aunts, uncles, neighbors, her besties, etc. Bad luck and a worse day, Mother. You always said justice is better served cold. The next one is a petty revenge story. Mother-in-law has always been bitter that I took her son away from her. She's the queen of negging, and I am often her #1 target. She loves to make me jealous. She sends pictures of her new cars, new house, and designer handbags saying, "Isn't it great I can afford all this?" Last summer, mother-in-law invited her other son, his girlfriend, and the girlfriend's sister on vacation, but not us. She bought them designer souvenirs and sent us pictures every day of their vacation, captioned, "I bet you're so jealous." Not 3 months later, my parents invited us on their vacation, and we accepted. Mother-in-law was furious. Jealousy is not a good look on her. She threw a tantrum, saying she was losing her little boy and that she wanted to be the best mom in the world. She was so jealous that my mother was getting more attention than her. She cried about how she never sees us and how we've always shown blatant favoritism toward my parents. The best part of all this? It was at this moment that my significant other decided to tell her that we are moving 5 hours away to my parents' city. The next one is a pro-revenge story. What's better than calling the cops on your sweet little old neighbor's heroin addict grandson for stealing your Amazon package? In July, my elderly neighbor had her grandson and pregnant girlfriend move in to help them out. She is a widowed lady in her 70s, babbles a lot, but sweet. I have a soft spot for her. Years ago, she cornered me as I was leaving to take my dog on a walk. My dog was unhappily pacing, waiting for the walk while we listened to her stories. He peed on her during the story. She is so senile she didn't notice. Just a few days later, I am mowing my backyard and the grandson walks past my house carrying an Amazon envelope. Weird. An hour later, the sweet little old lady comes over with the envelope her grandson had. This was in my landscaping. I had totally forgotten that I ordered my kids the movie Leap. What a crap haul for this kid. See, I am a criminal defense attorney. Probably the only one this lady knows. If I call the cops, my neighbor will try to hire me. It'll get weird. She is so sweet. I will be a witness. He is on probation, so he will sit in jail for a while. This will totally make me look like a snitch to my own clients in that same jail who are thieves, addicts, and burglars. It's bad personally and professionally, and it's not the biggest deal. So I filled up an Amazon box with purple rain powder that was ordered to my office. A dry dye that gets darker and spreads when it comes into contact with your sweat. That lasts a week on your skin. Think leaking pen times 50. Why? I want to shame him and it won't come back on me. He's not going to call the cops for stealing my crap. He isn't going to tell his grandma he stole from me. And if it makes a mess in her house, it's still cheaper for her than hiring a lawyer and paying her grandson's court costs and fines. Yep, the package was gone in 20 minutes. I walked past the home, screams of anger at the pregnant girlfriend. This crap won't come off. It's all over my grandma's house. Priceless. The following day, I gave him the head nod as he smoked a cigarette in a hoodie in July. He ran inside. Then I taught my kids to yell Smurf when we walked past. No snitching, just shame. The next one is an entitled people story. First time poster here, and I'm still in awe of the audacity of some people. I've read about entitled people, but outside of my school, I've never been in contact with any of them long enough to deal with them. That was until recently. Also, forgive me for any grammatical errors as I am writing on my tablet. I, 33M, am an ELA teacher based in China for the last 3.5 years. First, a little bit of information before I get to the story. There is a bit of a pay gap between foreign and Chinese teachers. It's also a well-known fact, but only the most opportunistic ones like to capitalize on it from time to time, if you're not careful. It can be anything from charging more at stands to, on the rarest of rare occasions, guilting them into complying. Trust me, it has happened, and those select few are not apologetic about it. Now, on to the story. It was Chinese New Year, and I was on the train to Chongqing to visit a friend. I don't like flying, and I really like trains. I had my Samsung Tab S8 Plus, and I was watching Final Fantasy Van Advent Children with my Bluetooth. Suddenly, I felt something nudging against me. I looked to see a kid, maybe in elementary, trying to look at the movie. So I turned off my Bluetooth and turned the tablet on to him so he could watch. Sounds weird, but being a teacher here, you get used to it. Anyway, he was really immersed, and though I couldn't understand him, I could tell that he was enjoying it a lot. He was trying to talk to me, but his English wasn't so good, and my Chinese was worse, so he opted for "I like this," "so cool," "me too," and things like that. Very basic English. He was a sweet kid, and he got to watch the whole thing before our stop. He even said "Chongqing," and I said "me too." He waved goodbye and ran back to his mom, and I began to pack my things so I could get off. Then ... IT happened. A woman approached me with the kid and in perfect English demanded my tablet. She literally said, "Give me your tablet." I thought I was in the Twilight Zone and wanted to ensure I heard her correctly. "Excuse me? Give me your tablet. I wanted my son to have it." I refused, a simple no. And she said those magic words that I'd begun hating to hear. "But you're a foreigner. You can just buy another one." Now, a couple of things. One, I don't know if the kid really wanted my tablet or not, and frankly I didn't care. Two, I come from a family that has taught me to never let anyone make you feel less than others. If someone tries to take my dignity, it's not going to end well for that person. And no, I don't actually have to fight to get my point across. Fair warning, I'm paraphrasing the confrontation because it lasted a lot longer than I cared for. I said, "No, I can't. I had to save to buy this. You can do the same." "No, you can give yours and stop being selfish." Again, I countered, "Or you can stop being an entitled idiot and buy your own." It was my first time seeing a shocked Pikachu face, and to rub salt in the wound, I added, "Shoo, shoo!" She did go away, only to come back with the police. That I should have seen coming, but I didn't because I was focused on getting off the train. Lucky for me, he also spoke English fluently. He was also really polite and, obviously, not in the mood for any of it. "Sir, this woman says you stole her tablet." I saw the woman behind him with a triumphant smirk while speaking Chinese. I let out a sigh. I had already wasted enough time on this nonsense. So I did what I always did when I wanted to get my point across in the quickest way possible. I turned cold. In fact, my students refer to it as me turning into Bing Yaoshi, ice teacher. I looked at the police officer and said, "I'll make a deal with you. I'm going to use my fingerprint to unlock this tablet. If it doesn't work, she can have it. If it does work, I get to bash her face in." That woman's Pikachu face came back so fast that the officer even had a shocked look. He asked me if I was serious, and I said, "Definitely." I guess the woman saw my face and tried to backpedal, but I wasn't going to let her go until I made my point. When she tried to leave, I said, "Where are you going? I thought you said this was yours." The woman looked to the police for help, but as I said, he was not in the mood and just spoke as she was. She said something in Chinese to the man, only for the man to give a short reply. I guess he wasn't going to entertain this and make sure I didn't hit her. "How dare you? You had the nerve to try to take something that's mine because I'm a foreigner. You're disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself." The woman had a mixture of fear, shock, and anger on her face when I finally asked, "Is this your tablet?" When the woman said no, I leaned my head in towards her and barked, "What was that?" She finally said that the tablet was mine before taking her kid and leaving. The kid did wave goodbye to me despite his mother's objections, and I smiled and waved back. The officer asked me if I was serious about hurting her, and I told him the truth. I wouldn't have hit a woman over an object. He laughed and wished me a happy Chinese New Year. I told my friend about this, and we had a good laugh about it. The next one is an entitled parent's story. My 28M stepmother, 49F, is a wannabe party planner. She has taken it upon herself to plan and host every party and holiday my dad's family has thrown since she married him. I never loved those occasions growing up. She's controlling and gets upset if people complain about anything, but humored her for my dad's sake. According to him, this helps her feel included. I'm getting married to my fiancée Jane, 26F, in July. We got engaged in early 2021, but Jane ended up getting pregnant a couple of months after that, and we decided to postpone the wedding to focus on our son for a while. So we've had a long engagement. My stepmother has tried to hijack our wedding plans from day one, complaining, contacting our planner, showing up unannounced to Jane's dress appointments, etc. And we have repeatedly asked her to stop. Dad wants us to humor her, but she's clearly resentful of the fact that she's not hosting the wedding or being labeled mother of the groom in invitations. Besides our baby boy, we also have Luke, 4M, Jane's paternal half-brother. She got custody of him a few months into our relationship after his parents died. I ended up moving in with them during the pandemic and have been in Luke's life since he was a baby. He doesn't call me Dad. and refers to us as his sister and his OP, but we love him like a son. Stepmother, though, hates Luke. She accuses Jane of baby-trapping her way into the family. That accusation only got worse after our son was born. My dad gets along with Jane and adores the kids, but stepmother demands him to refuse babysitting Luke so we don't leave the kids with them often. Instead, Jane's brother and CL usually watch the kids for us, as their children are close to ours in age. We had a thing last Sunday, and my BIL was out of town with his family. Jane's other siblings live in different cities, as well as my mom and sister. My dad agreed to babysit at our place, and we left. We came back to find both kids crying, stepmother screaming, and Dad weakly trying to calm everyone down. Apparently, Luke had told stepmother that both he and our son were going to be our ring bearers, and she went ballistic. She screamed that she wasn't going to allow that because he wasn't family. She then hit Luke, and he started crying. His lip is still split. She'd never gotten to this point before. We immediately banned her from our house and from our wedding. Dad is fuming and has said he's not going without her. He's also convinced half of his side of the family, by severely downplaying what stepmother did, to boycott the wedding as well. This includes my stepbrother, who fully agrees with his mother no matter how many times I try to tell him the truth. Jane and I are refusing to budge, but many of my cousins who aren't coming anymore are asking us to reconsider. Pretty much all of Jane's family agrees with us, but one of her aunts has suggested that maybe stepmother is acting out because she doesn't feel welcomed by my family. The last one is an entitled people story. I knew a lady who was going through a divorce. I was her tech person when she had a home business, and I was invited to her 40th birthday party. She wanted a new TV plus sound system hooked up and needed my car because the TV would not fit in hers. We went together to pick up the TV, and while she went shopping for food, her ex saw us together. I am married and only helped this person. I hooked up her TV, and after the party, I helped clean up when her friends left. Her ex heard from her friends that I stayed after the party ended. A few weeks later, she asked me to set up a GPS for her car. It was a hot day and her home's air conditioner had stopped working. I went there and knocked on the door, but she did not answer. I heard the car running in the garage and went back to the door to look in the front window. The house was full of smoke, and I found her passed out on the couch. I picked her up and took her outside. She was breathing and coughing. I went back in, and she had left the car running, with the window down to make the air conditioner cool the house down by the internal access door to the garage. This filled the house with carbon monoxide, which almost killed her. I turned off the car, opened up all the windows and doors, and comforted her. If I had arrived a few minutes later, she would have been dead. She was crying outside because she almost died, and if she had, people would think she deliberately killed herself instead of it being a mistake. At that moment, the ex drove past on one of his stalking runs. Later, I saw him picking up his kids from school, and he called me a cheating prick, which surprised me because we got along before they broke up. He had already been spreading rumors to everyone that I was sleeping with her. He told his whole family, her family, and eventually got to my family. I didn't do anything wrong, and when I told them what really happened, nobody believed me. Everyone believed him that something was happening before they broke up. Then he made up extra reasons to say she was with me. Oddly, my wife is the person who laughed it off because she doesn't believe I would ever cheat on her, especially with that woman.
The next one is an entitled people story.
This happened when my wife and I first got married. My grandfather had passed just a couple months before and left me a very sizable inheritance with a note to make sure I use it smartly to start a good life for my wife and I. My father-in-law downs a real estate company that buys foreclosed houses and rehabs them, and he knew of a great starter home for my wife and I, and agreed to pay to have it rehabbed with the understanding that we would pay him back when we were better established, or after 2 years when we sold the house. So we bought the house, and it took about 90 days to rehab it before we moved in. This is an important fact later on. So we finally move into our house, and had been there about 2 weeks when someone came and knocked on our door stating that they were the Homeowners Association, HOA president, and asked for my landlord's contact information. I explained that we didn't rent the home and that we were the owners, and then they followed that up by asking to speak with my parents. I reiterated again that I was the homeowner and asked them what they wanted. They explained that there was a HOA for the neighborhood, and that I needed to sign the HOA rules and that I owed $90 prorated for my dues, but that they would give me 30 days to pay as a courtesy. However, they needed me to sign the rules right then. I told them I wanted to read and review them first before I agreed to sign anything, and they were extremely pushy about signing them right then. I refused, and they told me that I had 7 days to sign them and explained that they have legal power to fine me if I do not turn in a signed copy in that time. I called my in-laws because I didn't know anything about HOAs and asked them for their advice. My father-in-law got pissed, saying that it should have been disclosed prior to the sale, but sometimes with HUD houses that gets missed. We agreed that the $30 month fee wasn't horrible, especially because they did provide a really nice playground for the neighborhood. So I agreed and signed the rules. There were a couple that seemed a little over the top to me, but I agreed anyway because from my understanding at the time I really didn't have any choice. It seemed fine enough until about a month passed and we had a small house warming party with a couple friends. Literally, there were less than 8 people there, including my wife and I. The house was small, but it had a nice deck, so we were out back having a small fire using a fire pit one of our friends had just given us, when I heard someone knocking at the door. No, pounding like a freaking cop. I just went around the house and there was the HOA president, his car in front of my house with a yellow police light on top. Yes, I'm serious. I asked him how I could help him and he very sternly told me that I was in violation of the HOA rules by throwing a party outside of approved hours, 10 p.m. curfew, and that I needed to send my friends home or quietly take it inside. I checked my watch and it was 10:05 p.m. I was amazed, but we took it inside regardless. The very next day, I had a letter from the HOA stating that it was my official warning for violation of the HOA rules by throwing and I quote, wild bonfire that was a safety hazard while drinking. I literally hadn't drank at all. Whatever. I brush it off and figured it was no big deal. Flash forward 9 months. We were hosting a teen group devotional for our church one afternoon, and we were playing a game of football in the street. We lived on a connecting street that got virtually no traffic, and only had 2 houses on it, ours and the family across from us, whose kids were also playing in the game. All of a sudden I hear a police siren and see the yellow light flashing. HOA president gets out and tells us that we have to break it up immediately as it's a safety hazard because one of the kids could run over. I was fed up with him and told him that they were fine and that we've been watching for cars and that he was literally the first car we've seen and we had been playing for over an hour at that point. He insists and asks what would happen if an ambulance or police officer needed to come down that street to save someone's life. This was stupid because literally both streets we were connected to have entrances from the main road. I gave in, and we went inside. Next day, I get a letter explaining that I was being fined $60, the maximum fine allowed for a first offense, and that if I wanted to protest it, I could attend the next HOA meeting. I decide that I want to protest the fine, but noticed that the fine was due in 30 days, and the next HOA meeting wasn't for 35 days. I opted not to pay until after the hearing, and wrote a letter back to the HOA president stating as such. I go to the meeting and it's literally myself, the HOA president, the HOA secretary, president's wife, vice president, president's neighbor, and treasurer, vice president's wife. My protest was immediately overruled, and I was also charged a $30 late fee for not paying on time despite notifying him. I was fed up, I couldn't take it any longer, but realized I really didn't have any recourse. About 5 months later, we gave birth to our first child, and about a month after that I was driving home one night. I was working a second job in retail at the time, and my buddy in the military called me. He had been deployed when my daughter was born and was calling to congratulate me. When I got home, I didn't want to risk waking up my sleeping newborn daughter, so I just sat in my car with the engine running as it was a little chilly outside. I sat there for about half an hour when I heard the police siren and saw the yellow lights. Now keep in mind, police sirens aren't quiet, and this was right in front of my house. His stupid yellow light was flashing everywhere, including into my daughter's bedroom. I got out of the car and rather rudely told him to turn off the light as to not wake my daughter. He explained that I looked suspicious sitting in my car with it running outside of my house. I explained the situation and he told me I had to go inside and that my history of being a troublemaker wouldn't grant me any leniency. I basically told him where I thought he could go and proceeded to sit on the hood of my car. He sat there for another 15 minutes telling me I needed to go in and at one point touched my shoulder. I explained to him that if he touched me again, I would take it as a sign of aggression and defend myself, which he responded by getting in his car and leaving. He circled the block about 4 times the next 30 minutes, which was when I got too cold to stay out and finally went inside. Next day, I get a hand-delivered letter from him and the vice president, and he also asks me to step outside to talk about last night's incident. He explains that he was being nice by not calling the police on me after I threatened him, at which point I cut him off and told him that he needed to get off my property before I called the police on him for trespassing. I read the letter and saw that he was giving me 2 different fines for $180 each, which were the maximum amounts. One for violating curfew, and one for disobeying the night watchman. I was done. I had reached my breaking point. This is where the revenge comes in. I start looking into HOA laws and regulations regarding fines and how to protest them because I felt like this was clearly abuse. I find that the law states that you must be notified of an HOA 10 days prior to closing on a house and must be served with the HOA rules within 45 days of purchase, or you are not subject to being forced to participate in the HOA. I remember that we weren't served until after we moved in, which was close to 90 days after we closed. So I called my real estate agent, who is a very close family friend. My in-laws have bought literally thousands of houses from her over the past 35 years, and asked if she had the paperwork still, and she said she can get me a copy. I looked, and it was over 90 days after purchase that we were notified, and there was no disclosure statement at closing. Relator says she must have misplaced it because it's required by law to be provided prior to the sale, and basically that she wouldn't miss something like that because it comes to her when they do a title inspect on the house whether or not there is a registered HOA. She does a little digging and calls me back 2 days later and says that my neighborhood doesn't have an HOA registered with the city or county, which is required. I end up calling the county office in charge of registering and give them the neighborhood name, and she says that our neighborhood is registered in the other city and not in our city, and that if we wanted to start an HOA, we would have to follow these certain steps, and that without those, the HOA wouldn't be allowed to collect any money or have any authority. Apparently, what had happened was our neighborhood was originally all in one city, but when the city lines changes, the neighborhood was split in half. The other neighborhood kept the HOA that was registered, and our HOA president was supposed to register with the state, but didn't feel like jumping through all of the hoops that it required. I was ready to walk down to the president's house and rip into him, but decided to be smart for a minute. I talked to my neighbor across the street, who also hated the HOA, and told him what I found out. He was furious about it as well. We talked to a few more and get a group of about 10 of us together that agree we need to show up at the next HOA meeting. Word had apparently spread because there ended up being more people than the library meeting room could host. I had specifically asked to be the speaker for the group, which they were nice enough to let me do. The president tried to prevent me from speaking due to being overdue on my fines. At this point, I'm about 3 weeks late on my last set of fines with a $30/week penalty on each fine, so my current bill is set to about $540, but I spoke anyway. I explained to them that I had contacted my in-laws attorney, also a family friend, who had drafted together a lawsuit regarding the fact they were impersonating a registered HOA in order to collect money from us, which was fraud. The president dismissed me and said I had no idea what I was talking about, and that he had had enough of my antics. The staff members all left immediately while the rest of us stayed and talked. A month later, we served them formally, myself and 20 other homeowners, suing them for all fines and HOA dues we had paid, to the tune of approximately $50,000 as some of these families had been there over 10 years. The president and vice president got their own attorney who attempted to legitimatize the HOA, but it required the signature of like 90% of the homeowners. They got 3 signatures, including the 2 of themselves. Some other old bitter hag signed. After that failed, they tried to settle by agreeing to abolish the HOA and showed that they hadn't financially gained from it and that all funds had been used for the park upkeep, snow removal, and other neighborhood events. We took a vote and this was turned down in overwhelming fashion. I was surprised I actually voted to accept this. Then about a week later, one of the other families calls and mentions something about the park maintenance and snow removal. Apparently, he had given a quote to do the landscaping for the park, cutting the grass, mulching, etc., and his quote had been a couple $100 cheaper than what they were paying, and that it had always bothered him because the person that did those jobs was the vice president's son, and that what they were paying him was pretty outrageous in terms of what's standard. Eventually, it went to court, where the judge looked at everything and mandated that they pay $21,000, $1,000 per homeowner, plus attorney and court fees, which were like another $2,000 for a total of $23,000 in damages. Additionally, they were fined by the city's governing body after it was reported. I don't know how much that fine was, though. We ended up selling the house that following summer, but I talked to a couple friends that still lived there about a year after it, and they said that the president and vice president both sold their houses and moved away because they were pretty much hated by everyone in the neighborhood, and that they had an informal HOA that people donated to for upkeep of the park. The next one is an entitled people story. As an immigrant from South Korea, it's not always easy to fit in with the locals, especially when it comes to finding the perfect spot for my favorite pastime, fishing. However, after years of living in the United States, I've learned how to navigate these situations and find the perfect spot for myself and my son, Hyun. One Sunday morning, as we were packing up our fishing gear, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement in the air. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the waves were calm and inviting. It was the perfect day for fishing. As we walked down the beach, we noticed a woman setting up her beach chair in the exact spot where we usually fish. I tried to ignore her, thinking that she would eventually move, but as we started to set up our gear, she approached us. "Excuse me, this is my spot," she said with a stern look on her face. "You'll have to find somewhere else to fish." I was taken aback by her audacity. This was a public beach, and we had just as much right to fish there as she did. I tried to reason with her, but she was not interested in listening. She kept repeating that this was her spot and that we needed to move. I could see that Hyun was getting upset, so I decided to pack up our gear and move down the beach. As we walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anger and frustration. This woman had no right to bully us and make us feel unwelcome in a public space. As we started fishing in our new spot, I noticed the woman had called the police. I could hear her yelling into her phone, claiming that we were trespassing on her property and stealing her fish. I was incredulous. How could someone be so entitled and ignorant? Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived on the scene. The woman started to cry and told the officers that we had been harassing her and stealing her fish. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I explained to the officers that we were simply fishing in a public space and that we had not done anything wrong. I showed them the fish we had caught and told them that we were not interested in causing any trouble. The officers seemed to understand our situation and asked the woman to leave us alone. However, as we were packing up our gear to leave, the woman approached us again. This time she was more aggressive and started to push Hyun. I could feel my blood boiling, and I knew that I had to do something to protect my son. I called out for help, and thankfully a group of beachgoers came to our aid. They stood up to the woman and asked her to leave us alone. She eventually backed off and left the beach, but the incident left me feeling shaken and angry. Update. After the incident, I decided to file a complaint with the local authorities. I wanted to make sure that this woman would never be able to harass another family again. I also started a petition to raise awareness about the importance of respecting public spaces and treating everyone with kindness and respect. Thankfully, the local community rallied behind us, and the petition gained a lot of traction. The woman was eventually banned from the beach, and we were able to fish in peace without any more incidents. However, this experience taught me a valuable lesson about standing up for myself and my family. No one should ever feel unwelcome or harassed in a public space, and it's up to all of us to make sure that everyone feels safe and welcome in these spaces. I also learned the power of community and how standing together can create real change. In the months following the incident, I made it a point to get more involved in my local community. I attended town hall meetings, volunteered for local charities, and started participating in community events. Through these experiences, I met so many incredible people and found a sense of belonging that I had never felt before. Hyun also benefited from these experiences. He became more confident and outgoing, and he made many new friends. I could see how much he had grown since the incident on the beach, and it filled me with pride. However, our newfound sense of security was short-lived. One day, as I was walking home from the grocery store, I noticed the same woman who had harassed us on the beach. She was walking towards me, and I could see the anger in her eyes. "Hey, you!" she yelled as she approached me. "You got me banned from the beach, and now I can't even swim. Do you know how much that means to me?" I tried to walk away, but she grabbed my arm and pulled me back. I could feel her nails digging into my skin, and I knew that I was in trouble. I tried to call out for help, but she covered my mouth and told me to be quiet. As she continued to hold me captive, I could feel my fear turning into anger. How could someone be so entitled and cruel? I knew that I had to fight back and show her that I was not afraid. I kicked her in the stomach and broke free from her grasp. I ran as fast as I could to the nearest police station and reported the incident. The officers took my statement and promised to investigate the matter. In the weeks that followed, I struggled with anxiety and fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that she would come after me again, and I was constantly looking over my shoulder. However, with the support of my community and the local authorities, I was eventually able to overcome my fear and move on. Today, I continue to fish on the beach with Hyun, and we feel safe and welcome. The incident with Karen taught us a valuable lesson about the importance of standing up for ourselves and others, and we will never forget the power of community and resilience. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened a couple of years ago when I was about 13 or 14. I'm 16 now. But I just thought about it. I used to have a piggy bank that counted the change as I put the coins in there. And I remember I had around $60 worth of change in the bank, and I had left it on my dresser once because my mom was going to take me to Walmart to trade it for cash after school. When I came back from school, the bank was gone, and I asked my mom about it, and she told me my stepdad cashed it out himself, and that he would give me the cash back, and I was like, okay. About 2 weeks went by, and I never got the cash back, so I started asking about it, and my mom said he kept the cash because it made up for all the haircuts and gifts he had gotten me. So one day, when he came home from work, we were going to have a BBQ anyway, so he was outside and he had his wallet and phone on the table outside. He carries a lot of cash, so I waited for him to go back inside, and I took $200 from his wallet and went back inside to my room, and I hid it in my sock drawer. I remember him asking me and my mom what happened to the money, and my mom didn't believe that I would steal from him, so she just said that the wind probably blew it away because his wallet was outside. My middle school was right beside a shopping center that had Starbucks, Chick-fil-A, and Wendy's, so every day when the bus would drop me off, I would go to any of those places for breakfast until my $200 ran out. The next one is an entitled people story. I, 27F, have a cousin, 26F, with whom I had a remarkably close relationship. We were like sisters. However, she was responsible for incidents that made me reconsider our relationship. In 2012, when I was 16, she gave me a strong relaxer that caused me to cut off 14 inches of hair. For context, I used to relax my hair, and it was always soft or regular since I have fine hair. She did this because she started dating my ex, who would not stop talking about my hair or my natural beauty. She stole my friends and possible boyfriends, turned family members against me, rubbed in my face that she was my grandmother's favorite, made fun of me for going back to my curly hair, mocked me for losing my older brother, slept with my ex while on the process of moving together, made a post on Facebook mocking me for giving birth to my dead baby while 7 months pregnant, left threatening notes and a voodoo doll on my car. I can keep going, but I do not want to make this any longer by explaining how messed up she is. I tried to get a restraining order against her, but the police thought I did not have enough evidence. I had texts of her admitting to doing it, but it was not enough. Or as one police officer told me, it could be faked. So I blocked her from all my social media and blocked her number. The only times I would see her were at family gatherings, but I would avoid her since I did not want her situation in my life, or avoid her not to have my mental health triggered by her. In June, she got engaged to my ex, 33M, and I found out from family members. My aunt was celebrating her anniversary with a BBQ, and I knew I would see her. I was having an enjoyable time, but when one of my aunts asked her how the wedding planning was going, she couldn't help but brag that it was good, and now she had an announcement. She looked at me with a devilish smile and asked me in front of everyone if I wanted to be her maid of honor, since thanks to me they both met. I was cold and told her no. She whined about why not, and all I gave her was a look. She said that it was time for me to put effort into fixing our sister-cousin relationship. I laughed and told her that by the time she was having her wedding, I would be in college finals and after that, on a month-long trip for my anniversary. I said it was better than seeing two clowns getting married. I also told her the reasons I said no, plus the little spoiled girl wants a Christmas wedding. She started crying and yelled that if I didn't do this, I was not invited to the wedding. I looked at her and said, "Fine by me," and walked away, leaving her with a surprised Pikachu face. I have not spoken to her since that day, but all my family members support me since they all saw how much of a horrible person she is. The next one is an entitled parent story. My EF called a couple of days ago and demanded that my daughter's name have my maiden name. For context, I am ethnically Filipino, but a second-generation immigrant, as I immigrated when I was 6 years old. Filipino tradition is such that the child's middle name must be the mother's maiden name. For example, my mother's maiden name is Smith, fake. Therefore, my middle name is Smith. My daughter had just graduated from high school, and my parents received a picture of her diploma. When they looked at the photo, they realized it did not have their last name, my maiden name, on it. They were very upset. Given that my husband and I are culturally American but ethnically Filipino, my husband is half, we decided to give her a new name for her middle name and have her hold her father's last name. I was also forced to have a hyphenated last name. Even though I wanted my husband's last name, I conceded on having both names since my parents paid for my education. It's hell to deal with even to this day. EF complained and demanded that I change her name. I told them we are Americans and live in America, including my parents. Therefore, we will use what is culturally appropriate. He told me he does not care about the American way and that I am turning my back on the right, Filipino way. My daughter is already 18 years old. I can't legally do anything regarding her name anymore. I had told him that, but he yelled and demanded I must get it done, not my daughter, me. And I better, or else. Personally, I have a myriad of reasons why I don't want my daughter to have my maiden name. A lot of issues such as FAFSA, schooling, and even inheritance could also be on the line if she were to change her name. Plus, she just doesn't want a different name. My daughter said no, and both my husband and I agree with her. Later that night, she called them and told them, very nicely, that she will in no way change her name. The only reason she would is if she gets married in the future. EF threw a fit on the phone and she ignored him and hung up. They haven't spoken to me since. I want to talk to my parents again, but if they're going to throw a fit over a name and continuously be upset, especially over a name they knew about for 18 years, then I will cut ties. I hope they get their act together.
The next one is an entitled people story.
2 years ago, a new family moved into our quiet little neighborhood and began their reign of terror. We've lived here for over 20 years, and except for these past 2 years, it's been wonderful. I love our neighbors, except this family. This family just sucks. I'm not even sure where to begin. They are loud, they are dirty, they are obnoxious, their dog barks at all hours, they constantly yell at each other, they throw parties well into the night. They steal my older neighbor's paper. They actually trained their Rottweiler to fetch the neighbor's paper. Impressive, but wrong. They throw their dog's poo into other yards. So much. They even cut my 80-something-year-old neighbor's prized roses for themselves. Who does that? There are about 100 issues I could write about and how we've all dealt with them, but this past weekend was my own glorious take on it all. Oh, and yes, we tried talking to them, we tried inviting them over, we've done nice things for them, and all we've expected is that they act like decent neighbors. That's never happened. In our neighborhood, parking is scarce. Most of these homes are classic 1950s with single-lane driveways, and parking is limited even on the streets. There's a busy road a few blocks away that has a great nightlife and popular restaurants, which means that at times, especially on the weekends, the street can fill up. This family has 4 drivers and 5 vehicles with only enough space for 2 in their driveway at a time. Constantly, they would park and leave their vehicles for days and sometimes weeks in front of others' homes, sometimes leaving their driveway empty for no reason with all of their cars parked on the road. I kind of believe that in itself isn't that big of a deal except for how and when they would do it. They were intentional about it all, would do so to try to cause the most grief with everyone, and this went on for months, a complete duck you to everyone. After months of this and no one retaliating or giving them the satisfaction of how pissed we all are, they started parking deliberately in ways to make it difficult to get out of our driveways. I had to have my husband come out most mornings to guide me so I wouldn't hit their car as I backed out of my own driveway. There were also times where they squeezed my neighbor's car on the street to where they couldn't get out. Finally, an older retired neighbor goes down to the city police station and inquires about what to do. They found a code or law stating that so much space from the sides of driveways and yada 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 is required. So we come home one night to freshly painted yellow curbs outlining every house surrounding this one. A few weeks ago, my husband's car breaks down and he has to get towed. On his way back, he starts talking with the tow truck driver about these a-hole neighbors and their cars. He tells my husband that if these cars are parking illegally, we should call the non-emergency line, and if they receive a ticket, to call him, and he can tow them at the owner's expense. It's the law. My husband and he keep talking and even meet up for a beer a few nights later. They are big fans of the Blazers' Rip City. He's a real good guy. About a month ago, we met a couple in our fair city, and it just so happens that the husband is an officer. We were already planning on meeting that Friday night, and when we met, I brought up the a-hole neighbors and their parking. He says that he'll drive through on his shift if he gets time, and if he sees them parked in the yellow, he has no problem ticketing them. Great. He also gets some of his friends to check it out when they have time too. Fantastic! We've been calling almost daily at this point about their cars parked illegally, but nothing was happening. That Saturday night, the teenage son throws a party, and everyone, I mean every single one of their guests and them, parked in the yellow of someone's driveway or blocked someone out altogether. Obviously, the little crap told all of his friends to block our driveways or block our cars in. I sent a text to our officer friend who told me to call the non-emergency line, and he'd be the one to look into it. But I'm scheming bigger. I call up the tow truck driver and tell him that there are at least 15 cars parked illegally, and all are about to receive parking tickets for blocking driveways and cars. I let him know we are friends with an officer, and he and I scheme a little further. We get a solid plan. I call our officer friend back and tell him our plan, and I also mention that the party is likely going to be filled with underage drinkers. Now, I hate busting parties, but I make exceptions for little craps, and especially little underage drinking and driving craps. He and I finalize the plan. Here's how it all went down. The officer and 3 of his partners go through the neighborhood citing all of the cars. Meanwhile, our tow truck driver friend has assembled a group of drivers in the nearby grocery store parking lot. My husband and I make an anonymous call about a possible underage party. The tow truck drivers start at the ends of our street, grabbing the cars as quickly as possible. A few alarms here and there, but no way could they hear it in the party. When they approach the house, my husband makes an anonymous call about an underage party in our neighborhood. Conveniently, our officer friend just so happens to still be in the neighborhood, so he and his partner go over to the house to check on it. As they knock on the door, lights go out, music shuts off, and the house goes quiet. At this moment, the tow trucks come in and are now towing the remaining 5 cars right from in front of their home. I just wish I could see the kids' faces inside as they are all having a dilemma about what to do. Do they go out and bust themselves for underage drinking and try to stop their cars from being towed? Or do they just sit and bite the bullet and watch $250 plus go down the drain? On Sunday, they had 3 cars return from being towed, and all 3 are parked just shy of the yellow lines. I'll call this a win. My husband and a couple of neighbors also spent Sunday putting up some new cameras. They were all very giddy and loud about it all. Something about all the lights and police on Saturday made them nervous. The next one is an entitled people story. When my husband and I moved into our dream home, we were ecstatic. Our beautiful property had a fabulous pool that we loved to enjoy, but our neighbor Becky believed that she had the right to use it as well. Despite our refusal, she continued to push and even called the cops on us when we denied her request. Our home was located just in front of a neighborhood governed by an HOA, and our yard led directly to a sidewalk that ran parallel to the eastern portion of our property. Becky was one of the residents of the neighborhood to the south of our house and claimed to be good friends with the previous owners. When we first met her, she was cordial, but it wasn't long before her true intentions became apparent. Becky started making comments about how her old friends had let her and her family use the pool in the past, and how awesome they were for doing so. She even went as far as wearing a bathing suit underneath her dress and attempting to barge into our yard uninvited. We told her that we were only using the pool for a few laps and would be cooking dinner soon, but she laughed and tried to enter our yard anyway. Eventually, my husband managed to get the point across that we didn't want her there, but it didn't stop there. Becky and her sons would often show up unannounced, asking to use the pool or bringing their friends over to use it. It was getting out of hand, and we knew we needed to take action. One day, while we were at work, Becky and her son snuck into our yard and used the pool without permission. We were furious, but we didn't want to escalate the situation. However, when we came home to find that they had left beer cans and trash all over our yard, we knew we had to do something. We decided to set up security cameras around our property to catch them in the act. It wasn't long before we had footage of them trespassing on our property and using the pool without our consent. We even had footage of Becky pouring beer into the pool. We took the footage to the HOA, hoping that they would put a stop to Becky's behavior. But instead, they accused us of violating the neighborhood's rules by not allowing the pool to be used by the community. We were shocked and frustrated by their response. Despite their accusations, we refused to give in to Becky's demands. We had worked hard to afford our dream home and wanted to enjoy it without feeling violated. Becky didn't stop, though. She continued to harass us, even going as far as filing a complaint with the police. We were devastated by the situation and didn't know what to do. We consulted with a lawyer, but the legal battle was going to be long and expensive. However, fate seemed to be on our side when one night we heard a loud commotion coming from Becky's house. We went outside to investigate and saw that her sons were throwing a wild party, with dozens of teenagers drinking and smoking in the yard. We knew we had to act fast. We called the police and waited for them to arrive. When the police showed up, they found drugs and alcohol on the premises, leading to the arrest of Becky's sons and several other minors. Becky was also arrested for contributing to the delinquency of minors. It was a satisfying end to our ordeal, and we finally felt like we could enjoy our home without fear of intrusion. Update. Since the incident, we have been much more cautious about who we let onto our property. We have also taken steps to improve our home security and have continued to advocate for ourselves and our property rights. We have also become more involved in the HOA, attending meetings and voicing our concerns. We found out that Becky had a history of entitlement and had caused issues for other neighbors as well. We decided to work with other concerned neighbors to hold the HOA accountable for its actions and ensure that our community was a safe and respectful place to live. We established a neighborhood watch program and encouraged others to report any suspicious behavior. To our surprise, the HOA responded positively to our efforts and implemented new policies to prevent future intrusions on private property. They also began to take our concerns more seriously and address the issue of entitlement within the community. The next one is a petty revenge story. My stepmom was a nasty woman to grow up with. She was mean, vindictive, and had an inferiority complex that she used to attack anyone who was doing well, especially those doing better than her. My dad spent my childhood over the road, and my mom was in and out of inpatient facilities until she passed, so a lot of my time was spent with her being my only available caregiver/guardian. I won't bullcrap and say I was perfect, but I wasn't bad. I was a good student, involved in community and school activities, and as soon as I could work, I got a job. My biggest issue was that I often took an attitude with her and her family, all of whom sucked to be near. These people have been in my life since I was 4, and I am now in my late 20s, and not one of them was ever supportive or kind. I had aspirations to go to school and be a psychologist, a teacher, a therapist, a veterinarian. Honestly, I think I just liked the structure school offered and wanted to continue with it after graduation, but as soon as I was handed my diploma, my stepmom handed me a notice to vacate the property. Less than a month later, I was gone. To be fair to him, my father did try to intervene and prevent the eviction since it was his home, but she was the main occupant in the house, and we were informed by a local cop that she could, in fact, remove me from the home and press trespassing charges if I ever came back. To this day, I think he was likely full of crap but didn't want to deal with it. So I was 18, homeless, and supposed to start college a few months later, and I had chosen a local school and rejected better scholarships so I could stay home and save money on housing. I found a place with a man that became my best friend, and I did try to attend school, but honestly, it just didn't feel right anymore. Between full-time work just to scrape by and the mental health issues that arose in the aftermath, I couldn't continue and dropped out. My dad was unable to offer much support, and most of my family never cared to intervene since she had convinced the majority of them that I had chosen basically to go NC with them. She would call and gloat about how hard the real world is, make snide comments about my dying mother, and in the same breath offer sympathy and support if I came back home. At holiday dinners, She would tell everyone I was the first psychologist she'd ever seen working the till at McDonald's, and if I defended myself, I would be chastised for not taking a joke. It was humiliating, and after a few years, I realized I could block her, and she couldn't do anything about it. So I did. My life did turn around. I work as a pastry chef in a bakery I adore and would love to buy someday if the owner would let me when he retires. It's not a life I ever imagined for myself, but it's a good one that I share with my fiancé, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. In the past 2 years, I resumed contact with my dad and as a result, his wife again. He's still a doormat and she's still an idiot, but she's not picking on a little girl anymore and I bite back now. I've also managed to contact my mom's family, who had been estranged from her for decades before she died, and met people who could have truly loved me if they had known I existed. Dad's family is kept at arm's length, but I finally have a family that I can talk about when my friends are discussing holiday plans, and that's all I ever wanted. Doing what I do for a living, I always show off a bit at family gatherings, and I've often made custom cakes for relatives when asked. Boundaries have been established, and after the first cousin who tried pushing them found herself without a cake on her son's birthday, they are respected. Stepmom hates my job. She hates that I'm happy, that I don't care if I'm a bit plump, that I'm engaged, and she's not allowed near the wedding. She hates that I'm good at what I do, and try as she might, the only thing she can ever insult is the fondant. Which, fair. I don't care for it either. At my dad's birthday party last month, I baked a lovely 3-tier red velvet cake for him and provided numerous pastries as well as a cookie buffet. My boss is a godsend for letting me use his industrial kitchen to make it all. The day of, all stepmom could say was my cake tasted like a box mix, and that was it. 2 decades of abuse, and I was finally done trying. I spent days making everything I provided, all free of charge, and she compared my labor and knowledge to ducking Betty Crocker. No shame to anyone who bakes likes Betty or any other boxed mix, but it's like comparing fast food to your cooking, and the fast food being preferred. A total slap in the face to the hours of labor and effort, and years spent honing and perfecting recipes. She asked me at the beginning of February to bake her cake for her 50th. No other details other than she didn't want red velvet, and it was for 100 people. I agreed. I stocked up on Duncan Hines and canned frosting, slapped the frosting on top of crappity sheet cakes a day before, and didn't bother decorating any of them. Stepmom was livid. I ruined her birthday, embarrassed her in front of her friends and family. How could I be so callous, etc.? I just told her she compared my cake at Dad's party to Betty Crocker, so she must prefer low-effort cakes. I left shortly after she started crying. Apparently, she had planned on Instagramming the party and had planned on my normal quality of care for my desserts. Dad didn't care. He just said it was best if I'm not around her for a bit and we meet up somewhere other than his house. I don't want to be near her again, and I hope her family choked on that dry-ass cake. The next one is an entitled people story. I was traveling by myself for the first time, and I'm only 18. I booked the aisle seat specifically because I didn't want to be in the middle of 2 strangers. It would make me very uncomfortable and conscious. I paid extra for the seat for this reason. When I got to my seat, there was a middle-aged man around 30, 40 years old in my seat. Normally, I'm very socially anxious, and this time even more so as it was my first time alone. But there was no way I was going to sit between 2 random strangers. So I did what anybody would do and informed him that this was my seat and showed him my boarding pass. He admitted it wasn't his seat, but that his coworker was in the seat next to him on the next row, and he wanted to be with him. He offered me his seat, which he said was the window seat. The window seat is my favorite, but cost more. So in my head, I was getting a good deal, so I happily took it. I basically hopped, jumped, and skipped to take the seat and settled down happily. That was until another man, B, came and told me that I was in his seat. So I looked at A, expecting him to pull out his ticket showing I was in his seat. But instead, this man looks at me sheepishly and says that his seat is actually the middle seat. He hoped that the seat was empty, but he was wrong. He actually expected me to be okay with sitting in the middle. At this point, I'm raging a little. I might be socially anxious, but I'm not a pushover. I told him no, I only agreed because he said his seat was the window seat, and that he needs to move to his seat or I will call the crew to sort this out. At this point, he just kept parroting the words, "My coworker is here, I want to sit next to him. Maybe you can be a sweet little girl and sit in the middle just this one time." The moment he said that, I realized I only had to deal with this because I was young and a woman, so now I'm livid and immediately call for the crew after repeatedly saying no because, again, I paid extra for the seat. Even when the crew came to sort it out, he wasn't listening. He kept telling them that there wasn't any issue and that this was just a small disagreement that could be sorted between us. When I informed them what was happening and they requested him to move, he just kept saying, "Maybe you can be nice. Can you please do me this favor?" And that immediately switched to, "You know you should respect your elders. Why do you need the aisle seat? You can easily fit in the middle." Turns out the other person wasn't even his co-worker. He was a random person who had his earphones in, completely unaware of the situation until it was escalated. At this point, I could not believe the entitlement. I told him I paid extra for the seat, and if he wanted the seat, maybe he should have paid the extra fees, and since he didn't and I did, I was going to sit in the seat I paid for and he can deal with it. Thankfully, the crew basically forced him out of my seat and into his with the threat of him being removed from the aircraft. The entire time he kept looking at me saltily and muttering under his breath on how the youth of today are so disrespectful. They should give priority to older passengers and the men, which I, of course, ignored. It was even funnier when he wanted the non-veg meal and had to get the veg one because I got the last one. He threw a fit about this as well, but I pre-ordered my meal while he didn't, so I was offered it first. At this point, the crew was getting sick of him, and so they told him they could give him an aisle seat in a row that was behind us. He obviously jumped at this opportunity. The crew switched him out for a nice lady. Turns out he got the very last row near the lavatory, which is why the lady was happy to switch in the first place. After that ordeal, I had a great flight, and the crew was really nice to me. When we landed, the lady who switched seats with the man thanked me for standing up to him and said that it was refreshing to see someone who won't tolerate such behavior. It made me feel good to know that I did the right thing and that lady had my back. From now on, I won't be afraid to stand up for myself, even if I'm alone. The next one is an entitled parent story. I have a brother-in-law, let's call him Bill. He is 26 years old, a two-time university dropout, and has never worked, not even a summer job. He is an okay lad as a person, just a little bit Kevin. I work in a large company and I have the ability to create positions, hire, and fire within my department. One day, my parents-in-law asked me if I could find some work for Billy. Although we did not need anybody in my department for additional unskilled labor, I went through hoops and corporate gymnastics for 3 weeks to create a position for him and justify it to my superiors. I had to explain why we needed this position and why we couldn't create a public job offer for it. I think I blew all my favors and definitely owe some now. Finally, the day came when I received a contract for him from HR. He was supposed to be a back-office administrator, or, in human language, a clerk. The salary was set a tiny bit under the national median for this position, but I simply couldn't justify more. This weekend, I brought the contract to Billy, who lives with his parents, and presented it to him. Here's how it went. For perspective, 1,300 euros net is the average living cost for a single person outside of city centers. Me. And here is your salary, the bottom line, which shows what will appear on your bank account after tax and social security. Billy. 1,300 euros is not much, is it? Me. It is an entry position, and your job is really just pulling from the archive or archiving with occasional data entry. But see here, I pointed at benefits each year, you are eligible for a certain salary increase. Billy. I thought I would become your partner or something like that. Me. Well, you're going to be something like my assistant. When I need something, I will tell the back office manager, and she might assign it to you. His father joined in. Father. What? You are making my son your errand boy, and for such a pittance, this is humiliating. Me. Frankly, he does not have... He interrupted me. Father. Everybody knows that you managers are sitting there all day doing nothing, so why can't my son? Me. Listen, I cannot make him a project manager in an engineering company. If it's about money, I can put in a word for him in the assembly hall. They always want people, and the salary is way higher, but it is really hard work. Father. Grease monkey? Like some Eastern European immigrant? Me. That's actually also quite a qualified worker position. I meant like an assembly worker on belts. Hard job, but as I said, better salary, including paid overtime, with more vacation than I have, and actually a pretty decent chance of promotion. Father. Haha, why don't you put him in a coal mine right away then? Or better, make him... Me. We are done here. Billy, If you do not come tomorrow at 7 a.m. to my office, I will put this offer to the Ministry of Labor for active job seekers. And good luck with your CV. Father, and this married my daughter? Me. Door slam topics, he called afterwards with my wife. Your husband thinks so little of us that he wanted your brother to be his lackey for $1,000 a month. Now I am happy you do not have kids yet. He would probably put them on a farm field. If he abuses you, let me know. I will knock his teeth out. Conclusion. Billy came today at 7 a.m. to my office to see those assembly belts despite the wishes of his father, but with encouragement from his sister, my wife. I am glad I could vent my frustration and anger with you here, dear Redditors, and at the same time amuse you. May your poop scrolling at work be fruitful. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.